Well, great nice to have you, all of you guys in the panel. Thank you so much for coming. One of the things when we were thinking about this thing with Reggie, I was like, okay, like, and we need to kind of need to do something in this space. Like, you know, we need to really kind of like there's like all this fragmentation. You saw that like slide 200 really networks and kind of like very excited about this chat with you guys because I do believe that the solution to any problem is not necessarily thinking. We engineers always think that we can solve any problem, but with these like problems where there are humans involved, which are things that I personally don't understand very well. Is that computers much better than human beings, but the solution to the problem sometimes comes from having a conversation about like, what it takes to get there. Otherwise, there's no agreement, right? It would be great if you guys want to, before starting the chat, I would love if you guys can tell us a little bit about, you know, yourselves, like a little bit of an intro so the audience knows what your companies do and, like, you know, why we wanted to, you know, what is it? Yeah, like, you know, a little bit of an intro would be great, and yeah, like what part of the ecosystem do you guys play? You want me to?
Sure, I'll start. Hi, folks. Nich Weinheimer, lead strategy at Skai, the artist or company formerly known as Kenshu. You may remember us from that. So you can largely think about us as representing the demand side in retail media by and large. So our platform is an enterprise platform for brands and agencies to use to better activate their media, measure, plan, forecast, you know, within the major platforms like Amazon, Walmart, Instacart, Criteo body retailers, and many others. And forthcoming integrations with Topsort and others. I got my start in the backyard of Amazon over the years, working on venture-backed startups that were focused on either advertising technology or integrated technologies inside Amazon and launched the brand on Amazon. So I'll try my best not to say Amazon too many times while we're up here. Hard to ignore the elephant in the room, but yeah, excited to have a conversation about this. I agree, it's a big topic, but we've got to enjoy the journey until it's all standardized. We got nothing to talk about, so.
Hey everybody, my name is Marius. I'm the co-founder and CEO of MarkOS. And we use AI and computer vision to instantly check your media, your images, your videos, your audio to make sure that you're following brand guidelines, regulatory guidelines, and platform best practices. You know, we think there's a problem now, but it's only going to get worse as more and more people start creating a lot more content using Gen AI. So that's one of the reasons we started the company, is that how do we make sure that even people that are not familiar with the standardizations that is available today, how will we ensure that all content moving forward is also following those guidelines? But today, our focus is still very much on making sure that even the content being created by humans is following those guidelines and best practices. So, yeah, excited to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm, this is loud. Joe McCorkle. I did not work at Amazon, so congrats. I got my start at HEB in stores, so actually I moved from there to Criteo and then off to Broadsign now. So if we want to talk in-store retail media, happy to do that. We just powered our 2 millionth screen, so I think we know a thing or two about that piece. We have a wonderful partnership with Topsort, and we are solving the omni-channel challenge that's ahead as we consolidate the tech stack attribution. So looking very forward to talking about standardization. I came from a few different industries before retail, including finance and IT. So we know a few things about standardization that maybe we can learn from, but glad to be here.
I'm Mark Donohue with Placements.io. Such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having all of us. We figured standardization, we all dress the same, so at least that would be a way that we could look like we're all in unison. So I've had the pleasure of launching and building retail media networks with eBay in-house, and then subsequent to that, Gap, another local company, and Western Union most recently. And throughout those journeys, recognized that I needed one source of truth for all stakeholders internally, CFOs, et cetera, to see the order management in its full life cycle, all the way through to forecasting and billing and invoicing. So the Placements.io platform really allows for that. I found it as an elegant solution, and we integrate with a number of different, not only technology partners, demand partners, supply partners, folks like Topsort, but we're really trying to bring the retail media industry an up level. And that is orchestration, standardization, and that's what we're here to talk about. So, great. Thanks, Francis.
Thank you so much. So now folks know, about the directors and the city of here. You guys have heard me before. So one question that we were talking with Mark yesterday briefly about this, but there's this display advertising huge market, right? Like, I don't know, it's like $1 trillion at this point. It's a very big one. And then there's this retail media thing that's like kind of like growing. What do you guys see as differences between these two markets? Would love if you can chat a little bit about that. Would love, because one seemed to have consolidated, be more organized, the other one not so much. So, yeah.
We're going down the line again. I mean, some initial thoughts. I haven't talked a lot about the rapid evolution of retail media, even within just like the last 8 years since kind of Amazon. Sorry, I said it again. Like really sort of threw the book down and said, "Go ahead, brands, knock each other out." And I was working in the Right Media Exchange back in the day, 2008. In the network era, as OpenRTB was starting to become the dominant sort of norm or standard for how display media was traded or served ultimately, and the rampant amounts of fraud. I mean, I was the hamster wheel behind the scenes of the small startup DSP that was like pulling network inventory out of the bucket of what people were targeting based on how fraudulent it looked. I mean, it was that bad. I think and then we sort of delineated between what was like open web and what was major walled gardens, so like a Google or a Facebook then, or now obviously. And retail media, obviously, we've seen just the major proliferation of these walled gardens. Amazon being of the scale of or closer to being a third horse in the race with a Google or a Meta, but then, of course, rapidly down that chain, you see the proliferation of all these other walled gardens. And being very different in that, in theory, within those walled gardens, you have deterministic reporting where the serving and the ultimate conversion are happening within the same environment. And again, in theory, that's much more trustworthy. It's easier for a brand to understand, and it's devoid of a lot of the kind of broader display ecosystem in terms of the privacy issues that were coming to the fore, or ad blockers on websites, or the battle between the different browsers. So I think the biggest differences that we're seeing is like, where you saw a proliferation of networks kind of focus on standardization toward an OpenRTB paradigm, you have instead a proliferation of more trusted networks that are going to struggle because there is no easy way to connect user across those gardens. I think that's going to be fundamental to this discussion.
Hi. Display is a channel. It's a standardized, vibrant, fluid ecosystem for sure. Owned and operated sponsored listings, or product listings, or on-site search are all also channels, but not as widely standardized because they're in several long. But the display business is a good lesson for all of us, especially when you talk internationally, because it's just sort of the lowest common denominator. It feels like it doesn't necessarily honor the customer the way we would want to. It's not really personalized, but it is a channel, and if you have multi-touch attribution, that's one of the touches for sure. Open it up to you guys for sure.
No, I think about third-party cookies versus first-party data, right? So it's like a scalpel versus a blunt instrument. So I try to go down the path of what's the actual purchase history with the actual customer. I think from a merchant point of view as well, you really want to have, Nich said it earlier in the last session, you really want to have relevant messaging, just not overly doing it. And I feel like with the first party data, we're going to get there. And I also feel, we don't know what Google's going to do. I know they might be in the room, but with what happened last year when I was at Criteo, we were doing all kinds of development about what are we going to do with third-party cookies and the deprecation of third-party cookies.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is some of our pilot customers, a big focus is more first-party data, so they could be obviously in a lot more control. And that's kind of what our focus has been on understanding. We deal with a lot of understanding the visuals of their videos, of their images, and the creative decisions they're making within those visuals, because a lot of the data that's out there isn't breaking down individual increment sort of visual decisions they're making. Is it the logo that's driving the traffic or driving conversion, or is it the product? So that's been our biggest focus for now, is like how can we get these platforms, these customers a lot more of that first party data.
Maybe as I was listening here, a couple of statistics. I was talking in an industry call today and representing some of our index. Amazon's DSP, so when you think about display, video, CTV, served through a classic DSP on the backs of Amazon's rich first party data is up 220% year on year in April this year. Walmart's DSP is up 3x for us. So there is a convergence happening here in terms of how full funnel retail media has become, and that these buying solutions like these DSPs are, the real value in retail media is that first party data, is that deterministic measurement. And so I wanted to bring that up, that they're not two separate registries, I guess, in one.
Yeah, and interestingly, because I also believe that there is like we were talking before about like, okay, if you're running on a lot of this data, there's a lot of things that you still can do with machine learning, but obviously solving the whole stack problems can improve our first party data. There's like, self-regulation from the retailers around that first party data as well. Like, it's their data. And like, they want to use it, and especially they don't want that data to go to a competitor to use, right? So there's like a lot of things going on there that are very interesting, that are self-regulating and somehow like, should be a better technological solution. I don't have one, but like, I think it's an interesting problem. What are for you guys, like from your perspective, obviously, and what do you think are challenges that this retail media, I mean, you touched on some of them, but that retail media ecosystem faces today, especially around fragmentation, cross-border collaboration?
The complexity, the previous panel really nailed it. The complexity of, especially at a traditional company, does not have a depth of ad tech chops. There's a learning curve both in the education process and then in the execution and resources process. But the most onerous is trying to create partnerships, and all of the orchestration of media channels, the proper technical capabilities underlying, and then the actual delivery of insights and data that follow on the enablement of channels is so far beyond the grasp of the traditional company. And I think the panel previously really nailed it when they said you are up-leveling your customer understanding, your marketing tech stack, the internal education around how you acquire a customer, nurture them, bring them to lifetime value that is acceptable and measurable. And then all of a sudden we're throwing ads in. And so it's a huge orchestration of the CMO, the CFO to get the resources, but I double click down into the partnerships because you have to partner with the technology companies that will enable you to do that quickly, get at scale, with incremental insights, and be able to share that goodness with your clients, the advertisers, not just the customers. So it's a huge balancing act. I don't know that that directly answers your question other than the degree of difficulty is high. And so finding a partner like a Topsort or a Placements.io is critical to stabilize a business in order to then try to achieve what someone said was just better practices. Best practices are Amazon and Walmart, right? They're doing it. And clients love them and want to spend more time.
I would go a layer deeper too on that notion of Nike. Let's take Nike as an advertiser. The displayer wanted to advertise on New York Times or ESPN. That was a pretty clean process. New York Times had an audience, they had a product to advertise. That's great. Retail media introduces a really complex paradigm where you have a long-standing history of two entities that have been at loggerheads negotiating with each other that now all of a sudden has been flipped in terms of like who the client is, who the customer is, and you've heard the quips at various industry events where the retailers are like, look, now I'm taking out, what is this? You're the customer now? How do I rationalize this? And those are two entities that are going to struggle to figure out how they share data with one another because they're constantly negotiating for the core of their business, which is how much am I going to pay as a retailer for the pallets of goods that I want to buy from Nike. Now you've layered in more complexity where it used to just be a negotiating tactic to say, here's a co-op percentage that's really just a marginal negotiation in our negotiations that now actually has real meat on it, and that they want to leverage a press for that brand to spend more media dollars through the door, but it's still in the context of trade by and large, which further gets complicated by these being some of the largest brand advertisers in the world that have huge brand coffers, and retailers are seeing that with dollar signs in their eyes, and rightly so, with better tooling, better technology that allows them to carry these businesses forward. But I still think that fundamental negotiation is, even Amazon dragged their feet for a long time on a lot of data that they would share because of those negotiations or how they would share it. And a lot of the technology is sort of being, the tails wagging the dog a little bit in terms of what needs to be stood up to solve for those problems.
I think data as well, from a retail point of view. I sold data to IRI and Circana. I didn't want to give it away. So I think trust and transparency is a big one. Brands are going to have a hard time scaling with RMNs, different RMNs, different KPIs and methodologies. Most of the brands I talk to, they say they can't handle more than 6 to 7. It may increase to 11 to 15. They're going to go after the big national retailers. But putting on my merchant hat, as Nich said, I bought product from brands. I'm not used to selling stuff back to them. So I'm selling the dream back to them. I'm going to be able to deliver. And I think standardization is going to go a long way with bringing down those barriers to start scaling that quite big.
Yeah, I mean, from our side, again, we kind of have a different point of view. We're working with brands directly, and the fragmentation they see is just the various requirements to be able to advertise on the ever-growing list of platforms. And then depending on the SKUs and depending on the regions and doing business globally, that list of requirements and regulations and best practices just keeps growing, so that fragmentation just keeps getting worse almost every single year. I think when we looked at just the top few ad platforms over the last 5 years, they changed their best practices 75 times. So it's, when we talk to a lot of these brands, they don't even know that they're advertising in a way that's no longer optimized for that ad platform or that ad channel. And it seems to be getting worse, not better. So yeah, that's a fragmentation we see.
Yeah, I heard the other day, I don't remember where I saw this, but also like, if you're advertising in some of these retailers, they change the way that they display the product and like the entire concept. And even for us, with our own integrations, we try to do these really quick integrations with retailers because, if you sell a product, it integrates faster, you have a higher chance to sell the product, but then you have to deal with like problems like they will change the DOM, and then we need to have a team of people monitoring those things. So one thing that it feels to me very interesting that Toby said before in the morning was like it also happens that the retailer CEO, you don't want him to be completely focused on maximizing ads, you know what I mean? So you also have like this entire, I guess you basements probably solve those problems of governance. So, like, you know, who has access to this data, this vendor? So it's a very hard problem. One question that I have is like, okay, let's say standardization. Why standardization is so critical, or would be critical, for the growth of this ecosystem and the retail media platform? So why do you think, you know, how do you guys can help us paint a picture around that?
Yeah, I can jump in. I had the privilege of participating in the IAB's Retail Media Committee for a few years. And, you know, we had a wonderful chair of that group, a guy named Jeff Bustos. And, you know, I had been on committees with the IAB in the past, and there's a real competitive advantage friction there. So standardization is a wonderful goal to work toward, because clients, CPGs, and folks who are using multiple retail media networks to accelerate and grow sales require some standardization. They get it on one or two excellent best practice, and then over here it's a longer tail. But it's a requirement by those actors, large retailers, OEMs, and brand owners, merchants, and they need it, because once you've got standardization of investment, measurement, attribution, then you put money after that. And so it does favor the big sophisticated first movers, their household names. But the standards are elusive, because Amazon has their own standards. Walmart, similar, but their attribution loop feels better, and their insights and their reporting. The Retail Media Committee was another one where you're just trying to wrestle a grease trade. You put these standards up here at 30,000 foot, but on the ground, everyone has their secret sauce. So it's important for those key players that are part of the ROAS, iROAS ecosystem to have standardization, but everybody else.
You know, we deal with some performance standardization, but for us, it's more when you're creating a piece of media, you now have to create it for like, you know, dozen of different platforms. So even disclaimers, for instance, are not really standardized. Like how you put disclaimers on a video for one platform is very different than how you put disclaimers on for another platform. So being able to have some standards of how we all do things would even speed up content creation, because right now, you know, a lot of folks are looking at how can I speed up my content creation using generative AI, but because of this fragmentation in standards, from legal to even framing content, it weighs down the ability to move faster. So we'd love some standardization, but until then, we're just trying to piece it all together and guide people the best we can.
Yeah, and you know, I personally, like, I feel that there is sort of a tragedy of the commons in this one as well, because your company obviously is trying and solving this problem in a way, but there's also like, these people could organize, standardize their offering to brands, it would be a different one. You know, yeah, but besides like kind of like these social problems that are incredibly hard to solve, you know, also remember that some of these retailers compete against themselves, so it's like hard and awkward to say, oh, let's organize so I can help you. What are technical hurdles, like, you know, technical things that you see from your perspective that are preventing standardization?
If anyone needs an idea for a company, technical hurdles. I showed this gentleman 20 ads. He's not enjoying them. He's not getting the joy. Or he bought the sunglasses that I showed him, but I keep showing him the ad. So the closed loop attribution, not just for what action did someone take, but what ads don't I want to show him? And do I see his customer record in my CDP with appended data around ads I've shown him he didn't respond to. And that's an elusive problem to say, here's every ad I showed you in the last 30 days, and you've responded to none of them, and you've not bought that product. So you're informing, one, a better customer experience, but you're also building a cohort with better customer understanding of lookalikes, products you've served them. Don't overdo it again, right? Because I do think that, it was mentioned, your customer has to be your goal when you're a retailer. You spent all that money to acquire that customer and bring them to lifetime value. You want to honor the relationship and the information you have about them. Everyone has 200 or so direct relationships with consumer products, banking, et cetera. And they know which ones they don't like. They know which ones aren't honoring. I'm giving you all my information. So that would be a product, either Topsort replacements and roll out, but it's a need. So that would be my, it's for the home of incubation here. So it's tough to do two screens.
We're going to come up with a company idea and share it with you guys.
Mine's called Breaking the Silos.
Yeah.
So I think when we talk about retail media, I think about on-site, off-site, and in-store. E-com teams, sorry, but maybe 10% of sales for most retailers, but 99% of the dollars in investment going in. Why is that? Because it's easy to get the data. Merchants are very siloed in store. Just coming from a merchant point of view, it's sacred ground in the store, and there's lots of conflicting activities going on, and just measurement. And there's a lot of early systems. So there's also a lot of secret sauce to some of these early RMNs, which is why they don't want to change or standardize. It's a competitive advantage. We were talking about that earlier with Mark. So I believe the ones that are late to the game can actually benefit most from the standardization to catch up. But yeah, breaking down those silos are definitely, you got to get the merchants involved because they've got a lot of conflicting activities within the store and the store operators as well. And we have to have a set of standards for how we actually measure. If I saw an ad on site, I didn't purchase it or put it in my basket, then I saw something off site, still didn't react, as Mark mentioned. But then I bought something in store of that product 3 days later. What's the attribution there? Who gets credit? Now, we were just talking to a retailer at lunch who said, I don't care. We sold more stuff, right? So we got to think also logically about, are we solving for just one retailer? Are we solving for many? What's the message there?
We've seen a really strong example of being able to measure the kind of path to purchase across all those different media touch points inside Amazon Marketing Cloud. And we're hearing rumblings of cleaner solution coming at Walmart. And as you kind of scale down, I think what we'll see over time is a big technical challenge, but opportunity as a standard is sort of arrived at where there's like a proliferation of cleaners that every brand and retailer need to collaborate within to get to the closer to that level of understanding. And into those cleaners can come, data around loyalty, around kind of consumer level insights or event level data that can be queried at a level that's privacy safe. And that's obviously one of the biggest technical hurdles. We're seeing it in action, in a pure play retailer like Amazon. It's going to, of course, be difficult for an organization like Walmart where their scale is so enormous and they're offline. Walmart Connect, this tiny little $1 billion+ business, is having a hard time convincing Walmart data groups to figure out how they, or data ventures rather, to figure out how they can surface data that would unlock these types of measurement opportunities and through which technologies, right? You see, you can do some research on like LiveRamp and just how important their customers are that do leverage their cleaner solutions. It's 4 times more valuable to LiveRamp as a customer when they're using those solutions. That will proliferate, and there's going to be a technical challenge, just like we have with integrating across now hundreds of different publishers to provide a one-to-many access point for marketers. They're going to want this one-to-many across potentially, if they have 15 major retailers they're working with, 15 different cleaners that they're going to need to collaborate in to get even close to that. Before we get into the fun stuff of in-store and the technical hurdles of getting a click and a conversion for the the version of that inside the store.
That's such a fascinating problem. Actually, very interesting technical problem. The clean room stuff. With some people in the team here, we've been really thinking to solve that problem. At some point, it's like, okay, let's do install. No, but like, which is an even harder problem. But it's a super interesting problem to think about. Like, okay, yeah, the cookie is like, such an easy way to solve this problem. But what if you have like the data from Nike, the data from Coca-Cola, the data from the bank, and how you connect all these layers of networks and connect them together, right? Like, so it's a very interesting problem. For me, so one of the reasons why we exist, like, we believe companies should have a reason to exist, so they change something, is that, from our perspective, when we were starting the company with Retina, which used to be a small vendor selling in these ad tech platforms, right? And you need like a PhD in marketing at this point to kind of work with these quality cards, like gigantic, like bidding and this and that, because they're designed for the brands as well. What do you guys? How can these like small brands like can compete, or how is retail media helping? We saw it, yeah, sure. DoorDash and some delivery apps are helping small brands, obviously, because also those small brands cannot even advertise in these places. But how can smaller brands compete in a place in an ecosystem dominated by this kind of giant wallet card?
Pick a specialized retailer for your niche.
Yeah. Retailers also define an audience. That's a very interesting point.
Yeah, Sprouts is actually doing that now. They're solving the long tail problem. They have a lot of brands that are not in other major stores, so I think they're figuring that piece out quite well. But yeah, and obviously probably do paid sponsored products to get in there. I would avoid in-store if you're a smaller brand until you scale, but yeah.
I mean, put your hand up if you've heard of the brand Anchor, bought a dongle from them, or seen the brand Zenus on Amazon for like home furniture or beds or something like that. I mean, these were maybe not, but there's.
I think so.
I nerd out on some of these because I've seen the evolution over the years, but the democratized nature of digital retail media is like, a small brand, if they have the right margin profile and the right strategy, and they can be quicker, more nimble to access new opportunities, they can punch above their weight class, or find a niche category that they can take share in and become effectively a household name with a completely different approach, with way less overhead. You see, there's statistics you can read on like MarkOS Pulse, just how many China direct advertisers there are that have, extremely wide margins as the manufacturers working directly through some of these platforms. So I would say that these tools in many ways are fundamentally allowing the smaller brands to take more share and upend the shelf where P&G might have owned the laundry detergent shelf in a store, that much easier on an infinite digital shelf to upend that.
Yeah, I mean, for smaller brands, I think being really confident in adopting some of the new AI technologies to punch above your weight, right? To move faster and kind of get that upper hand on the bigger enterprises, which typically take a long time to adopt some of the new technologies out there. That's kind of your edge, is if you could try out, because some of the new solutions are really, really impressive, but adoption is much slower, obviously, with the bigger brands, and finding those insights, getting your own data, so you're not relying on always, having to rely on the bigger players to give you that data. That's what we're trying to help some of the smaller brands to do, to move a lot faster. That's kind of the biggest edge we have.
And then the question that I have, and you touch on this, Mark, and maybe you can share your experience. And I know Patricia might be in the audience as well, but and I know, I did have the pleasure of talking to Jeff about this, around the purchase and the A/B testing and everything. And I'm just honest, this is my perspective, but when I was having this conversation, we build like software for this. I was like, oh man, like, this, A/B testing is very well designed for a brand to think out this problem because they have a problem with A/B testing, but I am helping a retailer who's just getting started doing a retail media, and they move from fixed to kind of like running options, and now I'm going to start talking to him about A/B testing and incrementality. It's going to be like kind of quite of a challenge. So can you guys, would love to brainstorm with you, what if we could talk to the IAB, right? Like, and we have people in the IAB here. What would you tell them? How would they could help us more regulate this and put us organized?
We're going to have to charge you for this. Or just do it. It's sort of a loaded question. There's certainly D2C tools, Meta, Shopify, you can set up your store. There's that segment of the market that has to be gritty. Like, they have to find out what works, get there quickly, and focus on what is going to return conversion. The incrementality measurements and AI tools that are now, boom, you can do your testing in the morning before coffee rather than it's going to take me 2 weeks and I have to hold out a group and do my controls, and then I've got to get the person who's on vacation to do the number crunching, and so I got to wait, so now it's boom, 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 and you can see I'm not going to waste money in that channel for that ad execution for this product because I can't tie even multi-touch back to it, even with a holdout control group of A/B testing. So the good news is, there are platforms that get you up to speed in orchestration, execution, that have AI tools. Some of them, I can't remember their names, but right out of the box, right? You're a smaller brand, you've got a couple of regional grocer or something like, and you want to get sophisticated quickly. There are now partners who can help you do that testing. The IAB has been great as a beacon and a forum for the dialogue. How do we solve for this for not just Google, Meta, Amazon? We have to solve for the rest of the ecosystem that's fighting for the 15 to 20% of the budget. And they're a good beacon for standardization, but they don't drive policy on the commercial level. They advise. They're really, their best foot forward is in DC. Pushing back on, this is accretive, it's valuable to the customer. The American consumer should want to be able to opt in for some level of tracking. And that's part of the value exchange. So I said a lot there, but we can take offline the IAB. I love it. So everyone's here.
I also contributed a lot to Jeff. We had a lot of late night pillow talks on IAB. But I think brands will pull their hair out trying to compare campaigns across different environments. So has anybody heard of DARPA? DARPA.net? Now the internet. Right? So yeah, TCP/IP until I worked in IT for 8 years, as you can tell. Once we had TCP/IP, everybody could talk to one another with protocols. And I think that's where IAB or some other body needs to come up with that for more standardization of all these KPIs and methodologies, because brands and agencies are going crazy. We just can't. They can't do it. They can't compare it. It's not apples to apples. And so I think it's got to go down that path. I definitely think we get started today. So
the IAB became so much more of an important body when evolution of display sort of reached its peak, and that sort of is public domain almost to a degree via those transport protocols, et cetera. Whereas now you have this problem of a bunch of private clubs that they kind of sit outside of it. Yes, it does use some of that plumbing once you reach into the open web, but it's like, no, this is my domain. No, I'm going to do it this way, right? And I think there's sort of the press to do it for the benefit of the advertising community, many of whom represent these committees at the IAB. But it's the challenge is like, how can you influence across private organizations effectively? And I think one area that pops to mind for me that is so important to incrementality measurement for a lot of our customers, is being able to understand the total pop piece. What's the total opportunity inside a given retailer? Retailers don't want to share to Kimberly-Clark how many diapers they sell in California, but there's a whole cottage industry of players out there that can help you measure the size of the prize and do that across the most important retailers. I think it would be interesting to see, and maybe I haven't been close enough to it, maybe IAB has gone there, but really start to push a narrative there and start to dig into how some of these bestseller algorithms are working inside some of these players, how they can help standardize those metrics that retailers aren't going to share natively, but are so core to a brand understanding. Maybe it does make sense for me to have negative ROAS if I'm taking share in my category. That's not something that is easy to get from a retailer, or may not be able to get at all from a retailer directly, but you can estimate it within 5 to 10 points of accuracy. And that really helps you understand if this is truly incremental, whatever the tactic is that you're leveraging.
Yeah. Super interesting. I love the comment that you made about, we were in the offsite, we did a tour at Stanford, and there's a plaque that says very impactful, says the birth of the internet. DARPA, right? And it's very ironic that also a very government-funded project built one of the most open protocols ever. But retail media is sort of an open protocol. That's the fascinating thing. It's kind of like the thing that an engineer will feel a mission for. It's like, we're going to help these people build protocols and everything. And I actually thank you for the comment about some of these companies could help. I actually don't think that in particular on the protocol there is a kind of a thing that webs, because then that becomes another wallet garden, right? So it's kind of like what we don't want. The reason why we have this kind of conversations and build these forums. So it's about how you bring this together. I think these are questions that don't have answer today, and the answer comes on talking. But I do think that the IAB should step in on this problem, because it's like an urgent problem everyone talks about. What advice would you give to kind of brands or platforms, maybe like us, that are looking to innovate and stay competitive in this kind of space?
I think you guys are moving in a really interesting direction that I think will represent a really interesting pressure that will help in a lot of the conversations we've had today, where moving more to where, look, if I've got a product to advertise, it could be served inside a retailer website through more of a component-based in-grid sponsored product. But that same product could be advertised in an IAB standard 300 by 250 out on the open web somewhere. The same product could be advertised on a social site. I think moving more toward this ability for an advertiser from the origin of demand to say, I've got a product to advertise, I want to be advertised in the best place possible based on the best propensity to purchase. We're not that far away. I mean, we're there within some of the confines of these channels, but how do you expand that network demand, especially in the markets where it's very fractured, where you have many smaller retailers? It's not just the Amazon and Walmart story. It's a multi-country, multi-retailer in Europe or Latin, right? Marketers are struggling, they're underwater, agencies can't serve it profitably. So what happens is they don't serve it, or they go to path of least resistance, which is just to focus on the big players. I think long-term having that more, I want to add inventory to a campaign about a product that could go across, sort of almost agnostic to where or how the ad is served. We'll see a lot more of a joining of the technologies of standard, RTB meets what might be site served with what might happen within a social walled garden, for example, all kind of coalesce behind one campaign into your goal for a given product. Taking on data about is my competitor out of stock? Is my competitor on promotion? On which nodes of this, or which audiences are most important? Based on many other signals that are happening, will feel a lot more like programmatic is today, but for retail media.
I mean, the advice we give brands that we're starting to work with is all the brands we're talking to are wondering about this whole generative AI and how can we scale content, how can we use generative AI. And they're taking all these pilots and the demos do really well until standard, and there is all this fragmentation across so many different placements. So not having that mapped out essentially does not set you up for success. it does not set you up to be able to adopt some of the amazing ability of generative AI and the ability to scale faster and create that, what we all dream of is like super personalized media, right? But in order to get there, you need to be able to map out this mess of non-standardization. So my big advice is like, make sure you have your house in order and you map out all of these standards so you could take advantage of generative AI when it's ready.
Yeah, building on what you said, I think I've seen brands not have their CRMs up to date, data taxonomy, and also not having shared goals with the retailer. Retailers got certain goals, and the brand may have a different one on a national scale, as opposed to the retailer and that local market. So I definitely think they've got to get on the same page.
I don't think I've ever seen a company that has a CRM up to date.
You've got a lot of opportunities. I mean, it's fantastic advice. You've got some of the most brilliant, forward-thinking disruptors in the room together. These aren't folks who want to see it all be standardized, because there's still some white space in the retail media sector to improve. And so Topsort has a seat at the table to advise clients how to do it better. And they don't want to all set up their AI kit bag. They want you to do it. Incorporate it all into the tool set that they're going to be utilizing, which is what we're doing with placements, is outcome yield optimization. That's a great tool. But it's not one size fits all. Maybe somebody's not even ready to use that yet. But so you're in a great seat to advise and help. And that's only going to lead to deeper product informing, and that you'll roll those products out. But you'll be a partner to those retailers, and they need it. So the ideas will come. So the advice is really keep the dialogue and the information flow with your clients vibrant, not just vendor, customer. It's got to be informing your product suite. It's going to be based on their need. It's probably going to be based with AI tools, and keep bringing us all together like this, and then you'll be the authority. I love it. So good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think for everyone in this space, it's like something that sometimes you don't want to really believe. You don't even believe in it, because you're like, okay, I'm building software for you. And then I get to sit in some of these meetings where we're growing ad revenue, and they say, oh, we want all these features. And like in one meeting, I said oh my God, none of these features are going to help you add revenue. I think you should move from all this fixed stuff into auctions. And I said that out of anger a little bit in the meeting, because it's like, I don't want to build all these features out of fear of the engineers pushing back. And then the most shocking thing happened. They told me well, we kind of wanted to work with you because you can tell us what to do. But even for us, it's well, we were trying to sell this thing, and now it's kind of a role reversal. But yeah, I agree. I don't know how are we with time, but I wanted to open it up for people who wants to ask questions to all this.
Yeah. When I think about standards overall, the first thing that came to mind, because of how relevant and how recent it is, it's this LLM AI conference. So OpenAI set their standards for how we should handle APIs, and we have Anthropic as well setting standards on how LLM models will communicate with other systems via MCP. And what I noticed is that there's a tipping point where the benefits of adopting the standardization are just so massive that you don't care that your competitor is making more money, because you're also making so much more money. So I guess my question to the five of you is, what do you guys think is that tipping point on retail media?
in and just say that I think when I go into a store, or it could be the mall, it hasn't changed that much in years. I'll walk around a grocery store, we've still got all the products on the shelves. There's no virtual shopping. There's seen some testing around, if I walk into a store, do I need to physically be in that store? Because I'm going to buy 80% of the same things I bought last week. And then I'll go and investigate, maybe I'll get ice cream, maybe I'll get some beer, who knows, on a particular visit. But the in-store experience has not changed drastically. And I do think we saw some of the heat mapping, we saw some of the sensors, we're adding screens, we're trying to change it. But I think that there's a tipping point where you can eliminate 3/4 of your time investment, your visit. I think there's a tipping point where, you aren't going to go to the store anymore. You're going to get that stuff delivered to you. But I think it's a cultural behavior. It's a visit out. It becomes an outing, which is one of the reasons I think retailers really have a powerful relationship. Because they're getting you to go in your car, drive down there, come to their store, buy the same stuff you bought last week, and drive home, and you're sort of happy about it, like you've accomplished something. But there's a tipping point where you've given the information. They know what you're buying. And I do think it's just going to change generational behavior around shopping. That's just sort of a futuristic idea, but I don't know if there is a tipping point because you've got people who want to still continue a behavior. But I love the question. I think it's going to be generational, like people who want to adopt and change and create it.
I mean, and I'm probably going to answer this question again from a different point of view. It's not necessarily just about retail media, but for us, the way we think about it is, in order for agents to do what they're promised to do and take action, and in order for LLMs to really have value, one of the big challenges within large brands is the adoption curve right now, right? And something like an MCP could really help speed up that adoption curve because now you don't have to be an expert on every single sort of topic, right? For us, we're mapping out all of the legal and best practices and brand guidelines. So now when a Gen AI company is getting started, they don't have to go do that same exact work that we've spent years doing. And I think that was, we've seen that in the past where once you have those building blocks, that's when things really start to speed up, right? We've seen that with API, we've seen that with the cloud stack and all of those things. So I think once we see more adoption of MCPs and these protocols, it will be hard to ignore because the only way to go forward is the only way to go forward past that adoption curve, to speed up the adoption curve, is to use a protocol to be able to get that jump start. So I'm very optimistic about it.
Yeah, I'll answer Matthew. I'll give you two points. One, the reason why retail media somehow exists is because even despite the fact that there's this is an industry dominated by incredibly powerful companies, the proximity to purchase is so good that the advertising is more relevant. And that's why you got this mushrooming of retail media. So that's one big point. I think the second one will be, it's a question that I think you should ask for yourself. When do I not ask the question that ads are annoying? If that's when the tipping point happens. If AI understands, is it capable to understand all these standards well enough that you are not implicitly having that assumption in a question, I think that's the tipping point. But we'll see.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have a non-AI standardization question. This involves more about dimension. So brands will have to deploy their dollars between different retail media networks, different retailers, but they don't all necessarily support the same form of measurement. Even when they're using the same mechanism, like, hey, I'm tracking store trips, I'm tracking MMM or closed loop. at Flip, we've seen drastically different results, even like between Foursquare and in market, which both measure social. Like, I'm not talking like 10 or 20% off, I'm talking like 5x off. So that makes it really difficult for an advertiser to deploy and measure apples to apples across channel platforms. How do we deal with that as an industry, and what advice do we have to say, how do we compare and standardize, and what efforts are made to allow that to make it easy?
I can tell you some of the things that we try to offer our advertisers is a lot of flexibility in how they can label or weight or define some form of whichever of those tactics they're taking, whether it's an ROAS number or some KPI that's important to them, that's going to be different on the next channel and then the following channel. So we see them doing a lot of like meta layer analysis, weighting custom columns into the product that allow them to get as close as possible to apples and pears and tangerines, because it's maybe as close as it's going to get. But the closer that they get with some of those, the weightings of their own definition on the demand side of what what the measure should look like. I mean, it can be as basic as what's the attribution window from a Walmart to an Amazon to a Target. How can I normalize that? How can I look at my 1 day, my 7 day, my 14 day over time, and then try just even doing that analysis can be cumbersome if you don't have it all in one place, or that you can start to derive some of those custom layered or mathematically derived columns that are in the solutions that we provide. Gives them that flexibility. It's not a perfect answer, which I think also leads into the question around as you get even more sophisticated and you're looking at in-store metrics, and there's a clean room per a dozen retailers that you're working with. There will have to be layers that sit kind of across all of that, and in a more sophisticated way, probably leveraging, and I know you didn't ask about AI, but leveraging something that can find those nuances better than our human eyes can, or even know how to kind of look for the what regressions to run between which channels, between which tactics, how to think about normalizing based on data that does exist in one clean room but not in the other, weighting that differently, or at least calling it out. I think we'll start to see the benefits of those AIs in support of analysis.
I have answered, I love this topic. So, in my opinion, the answer is moving from deterministic to probabilistic, and like essentially establishing, similar to like copper is traded as an 80% certain, like essentially it has bands on what it means to trade a commodity. We were talking about commodities yesterday. So you have a band, right? Like it's like, okay, this type of copper, it's kind of like not exactly the same as this one, but it all follows in a band that like can be traded at the same price. So that in a way is a probabilistic nature. And I think that, in my opinion, I might imagine this very controversial, but like attribution, it's one way to bridge the gap between like how you kind of like make these things converse. It's like by having bands at which like this is tolerable and this is a percentage and there's a statistical significance of it. Now we need to organize around those bands, but like that's one way where I think it could be solved with non-AI.
That's blasphemy.
I'm pretty sure it is. But I'm the CEO, so
Yeah, you get that's right.
Thanks for the big anecdote. I'm not trying to steal that. We're talking about standardization meetings. Do you think there's more that brands and particular agencies can be doing to try to help the standardization conversation? Because from a retailer's point of view, apart from getting some incremental ad spend, I don't really see the point of the effort of trying to standardize amongst your competition. So I personally think brands and agencies need to be doing more to try and enhance that conversation. What do you think?
Brands and their agencies are often the loudest voices that are being heard by the retailers, making exclamations that it's difficult to work with you, or you're not giving me what I need to, you're not giving me the data-driven argument as to why I should invest more. those pressure points are exactly what created the pressure for, I think Bobby was still at Amazon at the time when we were pressuring them, hey, you need to expose this or that data point via the ads APIs, because without it, they can, the customer can't make the data-driven argument to continue to invest. So I think the making a coordinated, even getting brands that are, we actually started a customer advisory board that's a mixture of agencies and brands. I was a little worried about it, getting some of these agencies that compete with each other, brands that are from different categories coming together, but those type of groups, whether it's an IAB committee that's working on standardization, even just like smaller industry groups, like why shouldn't all alcohol beverage brands try to come together, form a little consortium to put some pressure on some of their biggest retailer partners, that they come up with a paper that these are our demands. Those organizations aren't that difficult to create, and in fact, I think it can be helpful for technology partners like us to come in and help create those, because it benefits the whole ecosystem. That's one thing.
Build it and they will come. So you gotta, for incremental, I don't see how, JVP in the past wasn't measured very well. I pulled a check out of the drawer if I was down in sales for the week. So I think what I'm hearing from brands is that they're all going towards a retail media model in terms of measurement, because they got to look at every dollar now and how it's being spent, how it's being used, and what the return is on it. So I think you're definitely going to have to, all boats rise with the rising tide, right? And I think that's what the goal is for all of this. So I view standardization as a must.
Last question is Patricia.
Yeah, I don't have a question, just a comment, because we are having the standardization. Yeah, I can speak louder. Okay. We are having the standardization discussion all over the globe. So everybody is talking about standardization and the need of standardization. And I think that we are focusing so much on the retail media networks besides the biggest retail media network, Amazon. But when the biggest retail media network, Amazon, is not changing their measurement and how they are reporting, it doesn't help that all the others are changing it, because it's just, you said it, 20% of the market. So for me, the discussion is not about changes, not at the moment, it's about education. Because when advertisers understand, and just talking about one KPI, it's ROAS, that Amazon is showing you an adjacent ROAS, and the adjacent ROAS is based on a massive amount of sellers. So when you are advertising on one product, and this one product is sold by 100 or 150 or 200 sellers, and one of the others is selling the product, it counts into the adjacent ROAS at Amazon. So I cannot do this as Obi, because I'm not a marketplace for 100 or 150 sellers selling the same product. So this is comparing apples with not apples, because our business models are not the same. So it's unfair to use an adjacent ROAS from an Amazon perspective, because you cannot do it as another retail media network, but to adjust on one ROAS definition as all the other retail media networks is a disadvantage for all the other retail media networks, because Amazon is showing you much higher numbers. And so from my point was, the most important part or value in this is the discussion and the transparency coming out of it. It's not expecting really the change. When Amazon is not changing, we will not have change in standardization.
Can I comment back on one thing there? That I love that comment, because we run, and I think we're on our fifth State of Retail Media survey that we run every year. It's been great. We try to present it at CES, and I think I've been pushing for 2 years. I think maybe we'll get there next year. We want to do the State of Retail Media and the State of Amazon. It's like two different things going on here. Even you could just start to say from Walmart working outward, like omni-retailers, right? They're going to have a completely different way to tell the measurement story with a huge boom of offline sales. 80% of conversions are happening there, versus a pure play like Amazon that's got major marketplace dynamics, a million sellers in there. And most sophisticated advertisers are also not looking at just purely ROAS on Amazon, because they're like, Amazon Marketing Cloud is where they're looking, right? And so.
Okay, thank you so much for coming and for having this open and candid conversation. Please.